The sun had begun its descent over the quiet suburban highway, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. FBI Director James Calloway was making his way home after a grueling day at the Bureau. He was driving his personal unmarked sedan, an understated vehicle that reflected his no-nonsense demeanor. The license plates bore subtle markings indicating government use, but they were far from obvious to the casual observer. James, dressed in a crisp shirt with the sleeves rolled up, appeared every bit the seasoned professional, albeit off-duty. As he drove, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The day's meetings had been intense, focusing on sensitive national security issues. Despite the weight of his responsibilities, James took pride in his work and cherished these rare moments of solitude on the road. The radio played softly in the background, and the hum of the tires against the asphalt was almost meditative. Suddenly, flashing blue and red lights appeared in his rearview mirror. James glanced back, perplexed. His speed was well within the limit, and he couldn't recall making any traffic infractions. He signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, his brows furrowing as the police car pulled in behind him. The patrol car door opened, and out stepped a young officer, Derek Maloney, his uniform crisp but his demeanor tense. As Derek approached the driver's side window, his hand rested conspicuously on his holstered gun. James took note of the officer's body language, instinctively assessing the situation with the practiced eye of a man who had spent decades dealing with high-stakes encounters. He rolled down the window, his calm expression betraying no hint of irritation. "Good evening, officer," James greeted politely. "What seems to be the issue?" Derek's face was stern, his eyes scanning James with a mix of suspicion and bravado. "License and registration," he demanded curtly, ignoring James' question. His voice carried an edge that set off alarm bells in James' mind. "Of course," James replied, maintaining his composure. He reached into the glove compartment, slowly and deliberately, to retrieve his documents. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" "You were speeding," Derek snapped, though James knew for certain that wasn't true. He had been driving well below the limit, mindful of the road conditions. James handed over his license and registration along with a business card that clearly identified him as the director of the FBI. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding, Officer Maloney," he said, his tone steady but firm. "I'm James Calloway, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Derek's eyes flickered to the card, then back to James. A flash of recognition crossed his face, but it was quickly replaced by an air of defiance. "I don't care who you are," he said coldly. "Step out of the vehicle." James raised an eyebrow. "I've complied with your request, and I'm not sure why you're escalating this situation," he said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of authority. "I'd appreciate it if you explained the reason for your request." Derek's hand moved to unclip his gun, his knuckles white with tension. "I said, step out of the vehicle," he barked, his voice louder and more aggressive now. The command caused a stir among the few bystanders who had begun to gather at a distance, curious about the unfolding scene. Recognizing the potential for the situation to spiral out of control, James made a calculated decision. He slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the car door, stepping out with his hands visible. "There's no need for this, officer," he said calmly. "I'm cooperating fully." "Hands on the car," Derek ordered, his gun now drawn and pointed at James. The sight of the weapon caused an audible gasp from the onlookers. James complied, his movements deliberate and measured. He placed his hands on the roof of the sedan, his mind racing through the possible outcomes of this encounter. Despite the humiliating position, he remained calm, knowing that any sign of resistance could escalate matters further. The tension was palpable as Derek began patting him down, his actions unnecessarily rough. "What's in your pocket?" the officer demanded, feeling the outline of James' phone. "My phone," James replied evenly. "You're welcome to check it, but I'd recommend against violating my Fourth Amendment rights." Derek's expression hardened, and he snatched the phone out anyway, tossing it onto the car seat. The blatant disregard for protocol made James' jaw tighten, but he held his tongue. By now, several bystanders had their phones out, recording the encounter. The scene of a man being held at gunpoint by a police officer was enough to draw attention, and whispers of confusion rippled through the small crowd. "What's going on?" someone murmured. "Why is that cop treating him like a criminal?" James couldn't help but notice the irony of the situation. A man who had dedicated his life to upholding justice was now at the mercy of an overzealous officer abusing his power. He knew the implications of the event would ripple far beyond this stretch of highway. After what felt like an eternity, Derek holstered his gun, though his demeanor remained combative. "Stay right there," he said, retreating to his patrol car to run the license and registration. James stood silently, his hands now lowered but still resting on the car, his face calm but resolute. From the corner of his eye, James noticed a young woman filming the entire incident. She caught his gaze and mouthed, "Are you okay?" He nodded subtly, appreciating her concern. Minutes later, Derek returned, his expression a mix of frustration and confusion. "You're free to go," he said gruffly, tossing the documents back into the car. "But next time, watch your speed." James took a deep breath, biting back the urge to respond with the sharp retort building in his mind. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you, officer. Have a safe evening." As he got back into his car and drove away, James glanced in the rearview mirror. The bystanders were still filming, their faces a mixture of disbelief and outrage. He knew this wasn't the end of the story. What had just transpired was not only a personal affront but also a glaring example of the systemic issues he had long been working to address. James resolved to take action. This incident would not be swept under the rug. It would serve as a catalyst for change, both within law enforcement and in the public's understanding of accountability. As the highway stretched ahead of him, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a routine drive home was about to become a defining moment in his career and in the fight for justice. The next morning, James Calloway sat in his home office, a cup of coffee in hand, replaying the events of the previous evening in his mind. Despite his years of experience managing high-pressure situations, the traffic stop had left a bitter taste. It wasn't the personal humiliation that bothered him, it was the broader implications. An officer's blatant misuse of power, captured on film, could erode public trust in law enforcement, a system he had dedicated his life to strengthening. As James mulled over the incident, his phone buzzed on the desk. A flood of messages and missed calls awaited him. Among them was a notification from his deputy director, Clara Hensley. "James, we need to talk. Call me as soon as you can." Intrigued, James called her back. Clara's voice came through, sharp and to the point. "James, have you seen this?" "Seen what?" he asked, already sensing where this was heading. "It's all over social media," Clara replied. "Videos of last night's stop. You're trending, and not in a good way." James opened his laptop, and within seconds, he was staring at multiple clips of the encounter. The footage captured everything: the officer's unwarranted aggression, James' composed compliance, and the murmurs of bystanders questioning the situation. The comments section was a storm of outrage. "This is why people don't trust the police anymore." The man was calm, respectful, and still treated like a criminal. "Wait, isn't that the FBI director? This is insane." James leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The incident had gone viral, and public opinion was turning against the officer, Derek Maloney, and the police department he represented. While the attention could force accountability, James knew the situation was delicate. As FBI director, his actions or inaction could set a precedent. Clara broke his train of thought. "James, we need to decide how to respond. The media's already reaching out for a statement." James considered her words carefully. "Clara, let's keep this measured. Draft a statement that acknowledges the incident without inflaming tensions. I'll review it shortly." Meanwhile, at the precinct where Officer Maloney worked, the atmosphere was tense. News of the viral video had reached the station, and the chief, Martin Reyes, was furious. Sitting in his office, he watched the footage with a grim expression. "Damn it, Derek," he muttered under his breath. This was exactly the kind of bad press the department couldn't afford. Over the past year, Chief Reyes had worked hard to implement reforms, striving to rebuild community trust. Now, one officer's actions threatened to undo that progress. He summoned Derek to his office. The young officer entered, his posture defensive, clearly aware of the storm brewing. "Sit," Reyes barked. Derek complied, his expression a mix of defiance and unease. "What the hell were you thinking?" Reyes demanded, slamming a printout of the news coverage onto his desk. "That was the director of the FBI, and even if he wasn't, your conduct was unacceptable." Derek opened his mouth to protest, but Reyes cut him off. "Don't even try to justify it. The whole world saw how you escalated that situation for no reason. This isn't just about you. It's about this department's reputation." Reyes leaned forward, his voice low but menacing. "Effective immediately, you're suspended pending an internal investigation. And trust me, Derek, if this goes the way I think it will, your career in law enforcement is over." Derek left the office, his face pale, as his colleagues watched him with a mix of pity and disdain. The weight of his actions was beginning to sink in. By mid-afternoon, the story had reached national news outlets. Headlines ranged from factual to sensational. FBI director held at gunpoint by rogue officer. Police misconduct sparks outrage after viral video of FBI chief. A routine traffic stop or abuse of power? James' phone didn't stop ringing. Requests for interviews poured in, but he declined them all, preferring to let the facts speak for themselves. Instead, he focused on strategizing with his team. Clara had drafted a statement which James reviewed and approved. It read, "Last evening, I was involved in a traffic stop that has since gained widespread attention. While I commend the role of law enforcement in maintaining public safety, incidents like these highlight the importance of accountability and professionalism within our institutions. I trust that the appropriate measures will be taken to address this matter. As director of the FBI, my commitment to justice remains steadfast, and I hope this incident serves as an opportunity for growth and reflection within the broader law enforcement community." The statement struck a careful balance, addressing the issue without vilifying the entire police force. Despite his measured response, James was determined to ensure accountability. He requested a meeting with Chief Reyes to discuss the department's internal investigation. The chief, eager to salvage his department's reputation, agreed without hesitation. When they met, James was candid. "Chief Reyes, this isn't just about me. This is about ensuring that every citizen, regardless of their status, is treated with respect and fairness." Reyes nodded. "Director Calloway, I assure you, we take this very seriously. Maloney's actions are under review, and if misconduct is confirmed, he'll face consequences." James appreciated the chief's transparency but pressed further. "I'd also like to see this incident used as a teaching moment. Officers need better training to handle encounters professionally, even under stress." Reyes agreed. "We've been working on reform initiatives. This incident might just be the push we need to accelerate those efforts." As news of the investigation spread, public opinion grew more polarized. While many applauded James' calm demeanor and call for reform, others expressed frustration at what they saw as yet another example of systemic issues within law enforcement. Protests began to form outside the precinct, with signs reading "Justice for All" and "End Abuse of Power." At the same time, social media buzzed with debates, some defending Officer Maloney, claiming he was just doing his job, while others condemned him outright. Through it all, James remained focused on the bigger picture. He knew this incident could either be a fleeting controversy or a catalyst for meaningful change, and he was determined to ensure it was the latter. As the day drew to a close, James sat in his office, reviewing reports and updates. The weight of the day's events pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than just a personal ordeal. It was a chance to make a difference, and he wasn't going to let it slip through his fingers. As the controversy surrounding the traffic stop grew, the investigation into Officer Derek Maloney's actions began in earnest. For the local police department, it was a moment of reckoning. Chief Martin Reyes, fully aware of the stakes, had appointed a neutral third-party oversight team to ensure the investigation's transparency and fairness. The department's credibility, already battered by the viral video, hung precariously in the balance. The oversight team, led by retired federal judge Angela Cortez, delved into Officer Maloney's record. What they discovered painted a troubling picture. Over his 5-year tenure, Derek had accumulated several complaints for excessive force and unprofessional conduct. While none had escalated to the level of the FBI director's case, a pattern of behavior emerged that suggested a troubling lack of accountability within the department. Judge Cortez addressed the findings during a preliminary review meeting with Chief Reyes. "This isn't just about one incident," she said, sliding a file across the desk. "Your department has a systemic issue. These complaints should have triggered a thorough review long before now." Reyes' expression was grim. "I won't make excuses," he said. "We've been trying to implement reforms, but clearly we've fallen short. This is a wake-up call." As news of his suspension and the investigation spread, Derek Maloney found himself increasingly isolated. Colleagues who had once been friendly now avoided him, and his reputation within the department was tarnished. Yet, Derek refused to accept full responsibility for his actions. Instead, he hired an aggressive attorney, Lisa Greer, to defend his case. During a press conference, Lisa addressed the media. "My client, Officer Maloney, acted within his training and under the circumstances presented to him. The fact that the individual involved happened to be the FBI director is irrelevant. Officer Maloney followed protocol, and we believe this investigation will ultimately vindicate him." Her statement sparked further debate, with some rallying behind Derek, claiming he was being unfairly scapegoated, while others saw it as an attempt to deflect accountability. Although the local police department led the inquiry, the FBI closely monitored its progress. Deputy Director Clara Hensley worked alongside James Calloway to ensure federal oversight without overstepping jurisdictional boundaries. Clara arranged a meeting with Judge Cortez and Chief Reyes to discuss the investigation's findings thus far. "Our goal isn't to micromanage," Clara assured them. "But given the circumstances, we want to ensure this process leads to meaningful change, not just a scapegoat." James, though maintaining a low public profile, kept close tabs on the situation. He'd always believed in leading by example, and his handling of the incident became a benchmark for measured professionalism. Privately, he confided in Clara, "This isn't just about justice for me. It's about preventing this from happening to someone without the platform to fight back." As the investigation progressed, public pressure continued to mount. Activist groups organized rallies demanding police reform, while hashtags like #JusticeForCalloway and #AccountabilityNow trended across social media platforms. At one such rally outside the police department, a young woman named Maya took the stage. She had experienced a similar encounter with Derek Maloney years earlier, though her case hadn't gained attention. "I was scared," Maya told the crowd. "I didn't have a camera or an audience. I didn't have anyone to speak up for me. But today we do. Let's make sure no one else has to go through what I did, or what Director Calloway did." Her speech went viral, amplifying calls for broader systemic reform. After weeks of investigation, the oversight team compiled its final report. The findings were damning. Officer Maloney had violated department protocols by escalating a non-threatening situation. The department had failed to address repeated complaints against him, creating a culture of impunity. Training and accountability measures within the precinct were insufficient, contributing to systemic issues. Chief Reyes held a press conference to address the report. Standing alongside Judge Cortez, he faced a barrage of questions from reporters. "We accept the findings of this investigation," Reyes said, "and we are committed to taking immediate action. Officer Maloney will face disciplinary proceedings, which may include termination. Additionally, we will implement mandatory de-escalation training for all officers and establish an independent oversight board to review complaints." While the measures were applauded by some, others remained skeptical. "Words are cheap," one protester shouted. "We need action." For James, the conclusion of the investigation was bittersweet. He appreciated the efforts to address the issue but knew systemic change would take time and sustained effort. In a rare public appearance, James spoke at a town hall meeting organized to discuss police reform. Standing before a packed auditorium, he shared his thoughts. "This isn't about one officer or one department," he said. "It's about rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. It's about ensuring that the values of fairness and justice are upheld, not just in words but in actions." The audience erupted in applause, his words resonating deeply. As news of the reforms spread, public sentiment began to shift. While skepticism lingered, many saw the incident as a turning point. The story became less about the actions of one rogue officer and more about the collective responsibility to create a fairer, more accountable system. For Derek Maloney, however, the fallout was personal. Facing termination and possible legal consequences, his career in law enforcement was effectively over. Reflecting on his choices, he realized too late that the badge he once wore with pride had become a symbol of abuse in the eyes of many. Beyond the immediate aftermath, the incident sparked a national conversation about police reform. Other departments across the country began re-examining their practices, inspired by the changes in Reyes Precinct. James Calloway, though reluctant to be the face of the movement, became a symbol of accountability and resilience. As he returned to his duties at the FBI, James remained steadfast in his commitment to justice. The road ahead was long, but for the first time in a while he felt hopeful. The conclusion of the investigation into Officer Derek Maloney's actions marked a turning point not just for the local police department but also for the broader national conversation about accountability and justice within law enforcement. It was a moment that tested systems, values, and individuals alike. As the report from the Oversight Committee became public, the next step was legal action. Officer Maloney faced charges of misconduct and abuse of authority. The trial drew significant media attention, transforming Maloney into a symbol of systemic issues within policing. The prosecution presented a compelling case. They replayed the dashboard and bodycam footage, showing Maloney's unwarranted escalation of the situation. Testimonies from former colleagues, who had witnessed but not previously reported Maloney's behavior, painted a clear picture of a pattern of intimidation and recklessness. One officer, speaking anonymously, admitted, "Derek thrived on control. It was never about public safety. It was about power." In his defense, Maloney's attorney argued that the traffic stop was conducted under legitimate suspicion and that his actions stemmed from stress, not malice. However, the jury was unconvinced. The evidence showed not just an isolated mistake but a history of behavior that undermined public trust. After days of deliberation, the verdict was announced: guilty. Maloney was sentenced to a year in prison and permanently barred from serving in law enforcement. For many, his conviction was a small but significant step toward accountability. Within the police department, Chief Martin Reyes had no time to rest. Public confidence in his leadership had been shaken, and the Oversight Committee's findings made it clear that systemic reform was non-negotiable. Reyes outlined a comprehensive plan that included mandatory training, independent oversight board, and community engagement. Reyes also instituted a zero-tolerance policy for misconduct. "This is not about protecting badges," he said at a press conference. "It's about protecting the integrity of the badge." While these measures were met with cautious optimism, Reyes acknowledged the need for consistent action. "Policies are only as good as the people enforcing them," he admitted. "We're committed to proving that we've learned from this incident." For James Calloway, the conclusion of the ordeal was both a personal relief and a professional milestone. Though he had no desire to bask in the limelight, he understood that his experience could be a catalyst for change. James returned to work at the FBI with renewed determination. His approach to leadership was now informed by the ordeal. He emphasized empathy, accountability, and communication within his team. "We hold others accountable," he told his staff, "but we must hold ourselves to an even higher standard." Despite his stoicism, James privately reflected on the profound impact of the incident. He reached out to community leaders, sharing insights from his experience and advocating for collaboration between federal agencies and local police departments. "Change doesn't happen in silos," he often said. "We need to work together to restore trust." The case had far-reaching consequences. Inspired by the changes in Rhea's department, police precincts across the country began reevaluating their own practices. Grassroots organizations also seized the moment, launching initiatives aimed at improving police-community relations. One such program, Bridges Beyond the Badge, gained national recognition. Founded by Maya, the young woman who had spoken out about her own encounter with Maloney, the program provided resources and training for officers to engage positively with the communities they served. "I never thought my story would matter," Maya said at the program's launch, "but seeing Director Calloway's courage gave me hope. If we want change, we have to be part of the solution." The public's reaction to the outcome of the trial and subsequent reforms was mixed but largely hopeful. Social media buzzed with discussions about accountability, with hashtags like #JusticeForAll and #CallowayCase trending for weeks. News outlets also praised James Calloway's measured response. Director Calloway could have lashed out, one op-ed read. Instead, he chose to lead with integrity, setting an example for how institutions can and should address injustice. Still, skeptics remained. Some questioned whether the reforms would have lasting impact, while others criticized the justice system for allowing systemic problems to persist in the first place. Yet, amidst the debate, one thing was clear: the case had sparked a movement. In a rare televised interview, James addressed the nation. Sitting across from a respected journalist, he spoke candidly about the ordeal. "I didn't want this to become about me," he began. "But if my experience can shed light on broader issues, then it's worth sharing." When asked what he hoped people would take away from the case, James paused thoughtfully. "I hope we all learn the importance of accountability, not just in law enforcement but in every aspect of our lives. Change begins when we stop accepting excuses and start demanding better from ourselves and each other." His words resonated deeply, sparking discussions in living rooms, classrooms, and boardrooms alike. As life gradually returned to normal, James found solace in small, everyday moments, enjoying breakfast with his family, mentoring young agents at the FBI, and walking through his neighborhood without fear of recognition. Meanwhile, the police department continued its transformation. Officers who embraced the new culture became champions of change, while those resistant to reform quietly left. Chief Reyes remained steadfast in his mission, often quoting James, "Leadership isn't about power, it's about service." The story of James Calloway and Derek Maloney wasn't just about a single traffic stop. It was about a nation grappling with its values. It was a reminder that justice is a collective effort, requiring courage, empathy, and relentless determination. As James signed off his interview, he left viewers with a final thought. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. Let's make it one we're proud of." The impact of his words, and the events that led to them, continued to inspire long after the cameras stopped rolling.